Hello, Professor.
Perfect.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Very well. Thank you. So, Professor, I heard you say that you grew up a son of an immigrant mother with no economic security. You got into UCLA by defining yourself, and let me tell you, this is an amazing definition, as an unremarkable, your words, high school student. As you may know, diversity is one of the key values at IE University. And despite having 140 nationalities on campus, we understand diversity in a broad sense, including profiles from cultures and socio-economic backgrounds that are essential to add different visions and understandings of the world. And second, those profiles that are not remarkable according to standardization of remarkability. For example, we have no GMAT obligation in our MBA, for example. No? My question would be, do you think the educational system in the US, and probably around the world, is missing a lot of talent from people that don't have economic resources or that don't fit in the standard profile of excellence? And what role do you think technology is playing in this inclusion? As you know, Salman Khan will be tomorrow with us here at EnlightED, and I guess he's also going to have a lot to say about this.
Yeah, so let's set some context. In the United States and also in Europe, higher education has been probably the greatest lubricant of upward mobility in the history of our societies. This notion of enlightenment, this notion of trying to better yourself, and also this notion of a meritocracy where a very talented young person can work hard and with some luck get into this incredible platform called a college. And perhaps it might be a great leveler. And it's great for our society because we want people with the most influence to be a function of people who bring the greatest grit, character, and intellect. Unfortunately, I think in the US, and I think Europe is not far behind, the great upward lubricant, the great leveler of our society has turned into the ultimate caste system. In the United States, you're 77 times more likely to get into an elite university if you're from the top 1% of income earning households. People in the top quintile of income earning households send 88% of their children to college. People in the bottom quintile only send 12%. So unfortunately, in the United States, we like to think we're a meritocracy. That's true. We have a caste system. If you go to college, if you get into college, you'll make 2 to 3 times the amount of income over your lifetime than someone who doesn't attend college. And then within those universities, the brand name is very important. And the elite universities, or graduates of the elite universities, get to divide an increasingly concentrated level of the spoil. So we've transitioned from higher education being this incredible leveler, this incredible upward lubricant, to just an agent of a caste system here in the US, and I think increasingly in Europe.
That's actually very interesting, and I guess COVID is going to play a major role because, in 2020, 1.5 billion students, as you know, have experimented school and university closures. That is more than 80% of students worldwide. We have seen how learning has moved from classrooms to homes. Hybrid models of learning have become the standard. And although at our university, we have closed and opened our campuses and closed and opened them again, partly or completely. But we have done this safely thanks to our 20-year experience in liquid learning and obviously to massive testing. Today, still, most universities worldwide are closed and offering diminished academic experience. When COVID ends, do you think most universities will go back to business as usual? Do you think COVID is the great disruptor on the education systems worldwide?
So if you think about what makes an industry ripe for disruption, it's a function of how fast its increased prices relative to inflation. and then whether or not there's any underlying increase in innovation to justify that price increase. So think about technology. Every year, technology gets substantially better and the price goes down. Innovation up, price down. And that creates tremendous consumer surplus every year. Mm-hmm. In the field of healthcare, we've raised prices faster than innovation. Our outcomes around infant mortality or life expectancy have not kept pace with the increase in costs. So you'd argue that healthcare is ripe for disruption. Raise prices faster than inflation without a subsequent or inherent increase in innovation or outcomes. But that is dwarfed by the gap, the consumer negative surplus of education. And that is in the US, we've seen prices over the last 30 years increase, or tuition increase 1,400%. And if you walked into a university lecture 30 years ago, the fashion would be different. They'd have laptops instead of iPads. They'd be drinking Tab instead of Diet Coke, but it would look, feel, and smell mostly the same. And so what we have is a product that largely hasn't changed in 30 years. The only thing that's changed is the price. So think of a Mercedes 30 years ago versus now. On an inflation-adjusted basis, it's actually less expensive, and it's an entirely different automobile. Think about what's happened to technology. Think about telco, how much things have changed. So we have stuck out the mother of all chins. We are probably the most disruptible industry in the world right now. And the fist of stone coming to meet that chin is COVID-19, where all of a sudden the primary means of regulating and creating a cartel, and that is artificially suppressing supply. The means or the vehicle of artificially suppressing that supply was the campus. And that is my class brand strategy was limited to 160 kids because the largest classroom at NYU only fits 160 seats. Because of COVID-19, because we've gone all remote, I am now teaching entirely remote, and they've asked my class to expand to 280 kids, which means there are now 120 fewer students to fill seats for other marketing professors and marketing electives. Now, the opportunity is that should decrease costs. The downside is if you times that effect, one person teaching 280 versus 160, if you times that effect, if you will, that flight to quality, that scale by 1,000, we're beginning to talk about what might happen to universities. And that is there's going to be an enormous flight to quality. Supply will be ideally substantially increased across the best universities, which is going to put tremendous cost pressure on the tier 2 and the tier 3 universities who have benefited from price fixing and sort of a cartel. Universities have generally raised their prices in lockstep. So we're going to see not only demand destruction, fewer people decide to go to college, but we're going to see the top universities soak up more and more of the demand, resulting in an absolute destruction of economic viability for the tier 2 and tier 3 universities. We could see what has likely happened to restaurants in Madrid, where somewhere between 1/3 and 50% of restaurants by name are going out of business. I think you could see that same sort of destruction in higher education. We could see somewhere between 10 and 30% of our universities perish in the next decade.
Yeah, thank you very much for all that information, and that's a lot of information to understand, really, because when technology is about to disrupt an industry, there's lots of things that need to have to be taken into account, no? Let me also ask you this question as a university. You've been in Madrid to our university as an exchange professor, and you know that our purpose at IE is to foster positive change through innovation, research, and education. No? We say, although my wife doesn't like it when I say this, but we are in love with change. I don't know what she thinks I mean when I say that. No, but you are a very visionary. And you have a very visionary and interesting view on the future of higher education. And as you say, you think it's an industry about to be disrupted. No? In an interview in New York Magazine published during the pandemic, we could read the headline, Scott Galloway predicts a handful of elite cyborg universities will soon monopolize higher education. So basically, your prediction, is that education institutions will partner with big tech corporations. For example, we will have MIT at Google or Harvard for Facebook. And you gave us a lot of insights on skills and learning methodologies and technologies and scalability. And I would like to ask you some questions about this in a minute. But before that, I would like for you to answer us, why do you think big tech will go into education? And there's obvious reasons. And how do you envision these partnerships happening?
So big tech will go into education, not necessarily because they want to, but because they have to. The problem or the challenge that big technology firms, whether it's Apple, Amazon, let's take Apple. Apple needs to double its share price in the next 5 years, or at least have a credible rationale that they will likely double their stock price in the next 5 years. Otherwise, people will sell their Apple stock and they'll buy Zalando or Zoom or Peloton. And the only way they're going to do that is if they increase their top line revenue somewhere between 40 and 80%. And that's assuming some operational leverage. They may not need to double their top line revenue, but they're going to need to increase it substantially. That means that Apple in the next 5 years has to go find another $250 billion in top line revenue, which means they have to go big game hunting. And then when companies need to add $250 billion in top line revenue, they're limited to a finite number of industries they can go into, because right now, the majority of the world has a handset. Even with a super upgrade cycle from 5G, it's not entirely clear they could add another $250 billion in gross income to their top line. So assuming they have to go into other businesses, they've gone into the media business, they've gone into the music business, it leads them to one of a few places. The most obvious one is healthcare. I think Amazon is going to be the largest or fastest growing healthcare company in the world in the next 5 years. But I think Apple will likely enter the education sphere, because if you look at the amount of gross margin dollars produced in education, what other industry charges more than $100,000? Many universities charge more than $100,000 over 4 or 5 years at a 90+% gross margin. Hermes has 60 points of gross margin. Apple has 28 points of gross margin. Ferrari gets gross margins of around 30 or 35 points. Many universities get 90+ point percentage gross margins on their product for something they charge more than $100,000. The only other product I can think of in the world that is able to do this is certain pharmaceuticals for rare cancer disorders are able to charge hundreds of thousands of dollars at 90+ points of gross margin. But if you think about this, the gross margin dollars, Jeff Bezos summarized it perfectly. Your margin is my opportunity. So I think big tech will come into education because they have to, not because they want to, because it's the place with the most gross margin dollars that are up for grab. I think they will likely partner with the universities initially. So I could see Apple and the Bocconi partnering around some sort of design or liberal arts offering. Now, let's talk a little bit about IE. IE is in my opinion, is at a crossroads. And the fiduciaries and the board and the faculty have a decision to make. The first is IE will thrive. IE is going to thrive from a perception standpoint. There's going to be a flight to quality. IE is probably the premier brand in higher education in Spain. You will see, just as those smaller universities, there will be a culling of the herd, the tier 2 and tier 3 universities that charge an IE tuition, but without the IE certification or brand equity, will have a very difficult time surviving. After the culling, when there's more foliage or the same amount of foliage for fewer elephants, IE is going to consolidate the market and thrive. The question is, what does that mean for IE? Is IE going to become like the Ivy Leagues, drunk on exclusivity, and reduce their admittance rates such that they can go higher and higher in the rankings, which, by the way, have become a cancer of higher education because we all play to the metrics, we all study to the test, and one of the key components of a ranking is how low your admittance rate is. Do we fall into this trap? Does IE fall into this trap of becoming a luxury brand instead of public servants and boasting about how hard it is to get in? When I applied to UCLA, they admitted 60%. Now they only admit 12% of their applicants, and alumni are proud of that. That's tantamount to a homeless shelter turning away 88% of the people who showed up last night. I don't think that's a reason to be proud. Or will IE decide to use technology to try and dramatically expand its enrollment such that it offers more opportunity to Spanish citizens, to more people who want to come to Spain, to more people who want to integrate into Europe and hopefully build greater bonds, cross-border bonds. Great universities like IE are at a crossroads. Do they get tempted to become luxury brands such that alumni and faculty can feel more important and feel more credentialed, or do they stick to their roots as public servants and dramatically expand their enrollments using technology to increase admittance rates, decrease costs, and fall back in love with what I would refer to as the unremarkables? Two types of people get into world-class universities right now. Yeah. Children of rich people and freakishly remarkable young people. And I can prove to you that 99% of our children are not in the top 1%. So IE and the rest of the world-class universities need to fall back in love with unremarkable children.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me tell you from the IE side. First, I envy Ivy League universities with such margins that you have, because that's not the case in our university. But I envy Ivy League universities. And second, I mean, I think the mission of a university, and I want to ask you about this as well, no? It's not just about delivering skills. This is one of our missions, no? The mission of universities is also to create knowledge through research. And third, there's also a mission of universities, which is offering social interaction of their students. I mean, you went to campus in UCLA. You see how your students are taking huge advantages from being in New York, in the Village. So I think one of the important things of higher education is to offer, we call it at IE, a liquid experience, liquid learning, in which you can combine hybrid formats, online, face-to-face experiences, also on-campus and off-campus experiences, asynchronous and synchronous experiences. And I think, yes, absolutely, in education, in skills, we need to scale up. We need to scale up and to reach out much more people. And I think technology is going to be a great ally to do this. And actually, the pandemic is accelerating our, we've been in contact, we've been delivering liquid learning for 20 years, no? But other institutions are now getting into online and blended education, and I think that's a great advantage, no? But yes, obviously, we need to rethink our own models, no? But on this, I would like to ask you, do you think, as I said before, universities are, big tech corporations entering, universities should deliver skills as their only mission? Or, you think there's other areas that add value there?
We have a tendency, so the fastest way to process information is binary, to think of something, every issue in zeros and ones. So we think about vocational schools or liberal arts education. And the reality is we need a mix of both. In the US, we haven't invested enough in vocational programs. At the same time, a lot of people are critical. If you took 50% of the courses at NYU or at IE online, you effectively overnight double the supply, or you double the size of the campus, I should say. So we tend to think at UCLA, they say, we just don't have any more land. We can't let any more kids in. And that what you're talking about, so we could double, if you will, the supply, the primary governor or friction in dramatically expanding supply and decreasing costs has been classroom space and tenured faculty. And I think you could expand the supply of both of those things cost effectively with a mix of technology and in person. And I think the dirty secret is we could take half our classes online without much of an erosion in quality. Now, what you're talking about, the softer stuff. When I went to UCLA, I learned accountability. I went on academic probation and I realized that a lack of discipline and a lack of effort has ramifications. I fell in love. I got my heart broken, and then I realized I was going to be okay, and I developed resilience. I ran for student body and I lost, more resilience. I joined crew and I learned how to push myself harder than ever before. I used to get too drunk and throw up and learn my limits. I spilled into adulthood in this wonderful, safe, joyous environment. Those softer skills of higher education scale really well. Young people figure out a way to socialize, they figure out a way to interact, they figure out a way to play sports, they figure out a way for intellectual curiosity. That scales really well on its own. What hasn't scaled is the ability to let in more students, because admittance departments and university administrators and alumni and faculty have become drunk on exclusivity because that artificial scarcity raises their salaries, it raises their prestige. So I agree that the softer stuff, the leadership skills, the social skills that if you're fortunate enough to go to a great four-year university you get are invaluable. That stuff scales on its own. If you doubled the population of students at UCLA, NYU, and IE, they would still learn their limits, they would still fall in love, many of them would still decide they want to be philosophers. Many of them would discover they want to be journalists. That will scale really well. What we need to focus on is breaking the wheel of artificial supply constraints such that we can make excuses not to let in kids who aren't freakishly remarkable. The only people getting into the great universities now are the children of rich kids or kids who are freakishly productive from the age of 15 to 17. And most of us, aren't remarkable from the ages of 15 to 17, but we still might have remarkable futures. And the fear is that we're precluding or we're shutting off an incredible supply of people who are going to be remarkable in the future. And that is the mission, I think, of public universities, is to find unremarkable kids and give them remarkable opportunities. And we end up finding that many of them turn out to be absolutely remarkable. So it's not either or. Technology can open it up. It'll be a hybrid model. The social stuff scales really well. The opportunity or the need is to dramatically expand the learning and the in-classroom instruction. That's what we need to focus on.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think the question here is the level of scalability. Obviously, there is a level of scalability that we can assume, no? To give a very premium, I don't like that word premium, but an amazing experience to our students. But the point is, those partnerships, first, are they going to scale this in order to make it possible that we can still have an interest-free space in universities where we can get drunk, as you say, and we can meet our first girlfriend, or we can have a safe place where say, I don't know, stupid things. So are these partnerships going to allow us to do that, first? And second, what problems do you envision with this kind of partnerships? Because as far as every industry they have entered, they are now quite monopolistic in those industries. So what would be the outcome of those kind of partnerships if at the end they are going to end up really as a monopoly and all the threats that that implies, no?
So we have a tendency, college, higher education, at least in America, is so ingrained into our society that the majority, so only a third of Americans get a college degree, but 99% of the people in positions of influence and power have a college degree. And if you look at the most influential people in media, in government, and in business, it's somewhere between 90 and 99%. So the most powerful people have a very fond memory of the traditional college experience that includes soccer, football games, leafy campuses, fraternity parties. But the reality is there are a lot of kids that are fine getting a vocational experience and just want certification so they can have a better shot at providing economic security for them and their families. The Cal State system in California graduates 500,000 students, 88% of them commute, meaning that the majority don't want that or have access to that on-campus experience. But the tuition is only $7,000 for in-state students, which is incredibly low in the United States. I think that is where, quite frankly, America and Europe get stronger. And that is, if you're fortunate enough and want to have access to the on-campus experience, it's wonderful. It's something we all look back on fondly. But the most important thing, or the priority, is that we have a generation of people that have the skills to be productive in an economy such that they can innovate and they can provide economic security for them and their families. And again, it's not an either or. It's not an expensive, typical four-year college experience. There needs to be a variety of options based on your personality, your needs, quite frankly, your economic wherewithal, and what the opportunities are. And we have a tendency to think that everything should be focused on this prestigious four-year experience. And we have to break out of the notion that the only people who are fit to lead our society are the ones that go to a typical four-year college and have that type of experience. There are a lot of people who are very capable who don't want that experience. So, for example, what's prohibiting NYU and IE from having both? Having certificate programs that are lower cost, that are more vocational in nature, but also having the opportunity to come to Madrid for 4 years and have some of the wonderful intangibles we're talking about. And the reality is some people just have more options than others. We live in a capitalist society. The children of rich kids are gonna have more opportunities. The kids who work exceptionally hard and are successful by the age of 18 and accomplished are gonna have more options. That's the reality of the society we have chosen. But does it have to be an either or? Do you get into a four-year college or you get nothing and sort of get relegated to an underclass? In America, we are headed towards a society with 3 million lords being served by 350 million serfs, and higher education feeds into that dangerous trend. In terms of big tech, I think that you're right to be very cautious.
Yes.
When big tech enters an industry, a few things happen. One, generally speaking, there's some good things, costs go down. When Android enters the handset market, you can now get a great phone for free, effectively.
Yeah.
When Amazon enters retail, retail costs come down. There are some real consumer benefits to when big tech comes in. Yeah. Over time, they use that cheap capital and that momentum and that growth to begin slowly but surely sucking the oxygen out of the room for every other player. And we end up with a small number of players that garner all of the shareholder value. And also we lose a certain amount of our humanity. The people who are in charge of IE are people with liberal arts backgrounds. They think a lot about the Commonwealth of Spain. They think a lot about integrating the importance of creating bonds across border. The shareholders and fiduciaries of big tech do not think that way. They are 100% focused on shareholder value. They don't care if your teens are depressed. They don't care if your elections are weaponized. They don't care if the government gets no taxes because of tax avoidance. They don't care about unfair competition. They are not concerned with the condition of our soul. They will not take care of us when we are older.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there will be some short-term benefits to big tech coming in, but there is a very big danger, and that is they do to maps, or they do to education what they've done to maps, what they've done to streaming video, what they've done to online commerce, what they've done to social media, and that is it's great for the consumer, it's great for the shareholders of those companies, and slowly but surely it gets worse for everybody else in society. So I think I'm not here with a message of hope. I'm telling you what I think is going to happen. I'm not sure it's good that big tech is getting into education.
Yeah, no, I completely agree on the balance between scaling up education through certificates, certifications, badges, etc., and also given the full experience, the full university experience. And we need to find the balance there, because obviously we are not yet at that moment of offering that balance. But but I think that we are conscious about it. And I think that's very important. I want to ask you a question, and I'm a bit concerned with time because I wanted also to ask you about big tech and its opportunities and risks. But only a quick question about faculty. You're a great communicator, Scott, but probably this is not the same with many other faculty colleagues of yours. And they need to reskill in order to be part of this transition into hybrid models, into liquid education. What are your suggestions for the reskilling of faculty?
My suggestion is to adapt or die. Like every other species, there's sort of a two-class system among faculty and universities, and that is there are lecturers, adjuncts, teaching assistants, part-time lecturers who carry a lot of water and are generally underpaid because tenure has become so expensive that it crowds out the ability to pay other people who do a lot of the teaching. And the tenure system in the US has kind of become this very efficient guild. Tenure initially was to protect Galileo, protect intellectual thought from the trends or the winds of that time, such that you could say provocative things and have some protection. The reality is, I believe at business schools, we don't need tenure. And that is, we haven't said anything that provocative in the last 50 years. The difference between dark water and blue water economics, the difference between GAAP standard, GAAP 1 and GAAP 2 accounting is not that controversial. It's become a means of increasing compensation and lowering productivity. And I don't make this statement lightly, but I think over the last 30 or 40 years, at least in the US, every decision that university leadership makes is largely focused on one thing: how to decrease their accountability while increasing their compensation. And the net result of that is we have had a transfer of wealth of $1.5 trillion from middle-class households to universities. And it's, in my opinion, it's morally corrupt. Spring in the United States and in certain parts of Europe used to be a joyous but nervous time to figure out where you're going to college. In the US, it's become a season of despair, where you have to sit down with your daughter, who has worked exceptionally hard, and tell her that despite her incredible work, despite her getting into an amazing university, you just can't afford to send you there. Or these irrational decisions to take on debt that is greater than the value of our house and potentially put off retirement for years because we buy into this basic instinctual notion that we have failed as parents unless we get our kids to college. So the income transfer that has been affected here, the transfer in wealth from middle-class households across Europe and US to universities because of a cartel and the fact that we are drunk on luxury, has been morally corrupt. And I think COVID-19 presents an enormous opportunity for faculty and for universities to face a fraction of the economic pressure that households and individuals face every day across Europe and the United States. Our arrogance and our self-aggrandizement has led us to believe that we are not subject to a fraction, or shouldn't be subject to a fraction of the same scrutiny that every business, every household, and every European and American has to face on their own. The reckoning is overdue.
Yeah. So thank you very much for your sincerity. It seems that with COVID, that we have had a decade acceleration in 6 months, and that this is happening across every industry. Some businesses, like the powerful tech monopolies that you just mentioned, will drive as a result of the disruption, becoming even bigger and monopolistic. And while technology has generated great amounts of wealth, it has also sharpened social inequalities, as you mentioned before. It has done very little to address global issues, such as climate change or helping the rise of populist movements in several strong democracies. In addition to this, they are boosting their revenues by selling their capacity to influence us through our data, with no real privacy policies in place. In my opinion, all this could even question the essence of liberal democracies. So what are your views on tech companies, as you mentioned before, and their influence in our societies? And what role do you think, I don't want to say traditional universities, but interest-free spaces should play on avoiding those risks?
So you brought up an interesting concept, and that is COVID-19 is more of an accelerant than a change agent. None of the trends are really that different here. They just accelerated 10 years. I believe we always said in 10 to 20 years, China would become the new superpower. I think it's happened. In America, we don't like to admit it, but as we withdraw from the World Health Organization, China fills the void of leadership that America has created, and they're stepping in. As we argue over the vaccine and refuse to wear masks in the US, China is now saying when they have a vaccine, they will distribute it for free in Thailand and other countries, and they're establishing goodwill around the world. US e-commerce was at 18% of retail. In March, in 8 weeks, it jumped 28%. It jumped 10 years in 8 weeks. The number of young adults living at home in Europe has accelerated by 10 years. There are now more young adults in Europe and US living at home than living on their own. Government spending has accelerated 10 years. So this is an accelerant. Unfortunately, one of the key steps to tyranny, and we saw this in Germany in the 30s, is that when private power begins co-opting the government, when the government is no longer a countervailing force but a co-conspirator to private power, it takes us to very ugly places. And I think that the power that these companies have, in the last 6 months, Amazon has added the market capitalization of all retail in Europe. Google has enough cash on their balance sheet to buy Boeing and Airbus for cash. Jeff Bezos, with his personal wealth, could buy every football team in Europe, every basketball team in the United States, Bombardier, and then with his spare cash could buy Airbus, Hugo Boss, Carrefour for groceries, and then buy the Pan Am building. It's striking that we have let wealth for certain individuals become this concentrated, and we've let so few companies become this powerful. 98% of the gains in the marketplace since March are represented by just 7 companies. So while we take cold comfort in the notion that the market is up, the market is not up. Some companies have accelerated, and we just have to decide as a society, are we comfortable with an increasing amount of power, an increasing amount of the spoils being garnered by fewer and fewer companies and fewer people? So we just have a decision as a population to make. Are we comfortable with this concentration of power? It's happened more dramatically in the US, but Europe is not far behind. The same things are happening there. I hope that I'm very encouraged by Marguerite Vestager, and that Europe is being more focused on antitrust and regulation. But these companies have blown by any reasonable test of a dangerous concentration of power.
Thank you so much, Scott.
Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Scott. Muchísimas gracias, Diego del Alcázar Benjumea, vicepresidente ejecutivo de EA University, por esta charla. Muchas gracias, de verdad. Ha sido muy, muy interesante, más que interesante, diría yo.
Muchas gracias.